Hello and welcome to Baiju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an important article from page number 1 of the Delhi edition. This article deals with the proposed vision of Niti Aayog to develop infrastructure projects at the vulnerable Great Nicobar Island. The Niti Aayog has proposed a holistic and sustainable development vision for the Great Nicobar Island, similar to the earlier proposal that was made for the Little Andaman Island. As per this latest proposal, Niti Aayog envisions the creation of modern transportation infrastructure on the Great Nicobar Island, and for the phase 1 of this proposed project, a total land area of around 150 to 244 square kilometers would be needed on this small and ecologically sensitive island, which measures just around 910 square kilometers in total. So the proposed phase 1 of the project will take away around 18% of the land area of the Great Nicobar Island, and it will cover nearly a quarter of its coastline, which is considered to be environmentally critical. Under phase 1 of this project, Niti Aayog has proposed the construction of an airport, a transshipment port, a mass rapid transportation system, the establishment of a free trade zone, and a warehousing complex. According to this article, these projects proposed by the Niti Aayog under its vision for the Great Nicobar Island doesn't take into account the ecological, sociological, and geological consequences of these projects. See, if you look at this map of Andaman and Nicobar chain of islands, you will find that the Great Nicobar Island is located over here at the southernmost tip of India. On this island, we have a very important biosphere reserve, that is the Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve. This biosphere reserve is made up of two national parks, that is the Galathea National Park, located over here near the Galathea Bay, closer to the Indira Point, and it also includes the Campbell Bay National Park, located over here. This island is home to a number of threatened species of animals and birds, including the giant leatherback turtle and the Nicobar megapod. Many of these threatened species find a habitat in and around the Galathea Bay and the Campbell Bay. And as you can see over here, this entire coastline is very sensitive from an environment and conservation perspective, because these are the nesting sites for many of these threatened species of animals and birds. This island is also home to several indigenous tribes such as the Shompen and the Nicobarese. And until now, the limited connectivity to this island and the protective laws, along with suitable regulations, had offered protection to these threatened species and as well as to the indigenous tribes. As of now, the sole airport in the entire chain of islands is located at Port Blair, and any large-scale industrial and developmental activities have been strictly restricted in order to protect the threatened species of native birds and animals and as well as the vulnerable indigenous tribes. But however, the proposed development vision of Niti Aayog doesn't take these factors into account, and the author of this article is of the opinion that these projects is going to threaten the ecological, sociological, and geological well-being of the Great Nicobar Island. See, from an ecological perspective, the proposed sites for these projects, they fall under Coastal Regulation Zone 1, which offers maximum protection against such development projects. These areas are also supposed to be a part of an ecologically sensitive zone where such large-scale construction is not allowed. And we should also take into account that the National Board for Wildlife has denotified the entire Galathea Bay National Park and Wildlife Sanctuary in order to allow for the development of this port. A standing committee of the National Board for Wildlife has already approved this decision, but the National Board for Wildlife seems to be unaware that under India's National Marine Turtle Action Plan, the entire Galathea Bay has been designated as an important coastal and marine biodiversity area, and as well as it has been listed as an important marine turtle habitat. This region in and around the Galathea Bay is home to several threatened species, which includes the Nicobar wild pig, the Nicobar tree shrew, the Great Nicobar Crested Serpent Eagle, the Nicobar Paradise Flycatcher, and the Nicobar Megapod, and as well as the threatened giant leatherback turtle. The Galathea Bay area is the nesting site for the giant leatherback turtle and the Nicobar megapod. And the reason why this region was designated as a wildlife sanctuary and national park in the first place was because this bay area was the nesting site for the giant leatherback turtle. Then the Nicobar megapod has been listed as globally endangered, and it is not only native to this region, but it is also one of the most important nesting sites for the bird. Then even from a sociological perspective, these proposed projects will have a huge impact on the rights and the well-being of the indigenous tribes, such as the Shompen and the Nicobarese. This vision of the Niti Aayog contradicts the government's policy itself because in 2015, the government of India had come out with a policy on the Shompen tribe of Great Nicobar Island. And according to this policy, the government itself had committed to first prioritize the welfare and the integrity of the Shompen tribe before granting approval for any large-scale development projects on the Great Nicobar Island. Then it also appears that the development vision of Niti Aayog doesn't take into account the geological vulnerability of these islands. It's a well-known fact that the Andaman Nicobar group of islands, they sit on a very seismically active zone and they are highly vulnerable for earthquakes and tsunamis. In fact, back in 2004, when the Indian Ocean tsunami struck the Andaman Nicobar Islands, both Galathea Bay and Campbell Bay were hit by 8-meter high waves, and even the southernmost point of India, that is Indira Point, has come under water since then. So by building such large-scale expensive projects in such a sensitive hazardous zone, the government might even be risking these investments and posing a threat to life and property. And hence the writer is questioning the Niti Aayog and the government whether these ecological, sociological and geological factors were taken into account before drafting this development vision. Because as of now, neither the government nor the Niti Aayog have provided any details with regard to environment impact assessment, and there is no evidence of any scientific studies being carried out on the impact of these projects. Now let's take up an article from page number 14, which evaluates the Places of Worship Act 1991. This act is in news because a petition has come up in front of the Supreme Court challenging its constitutional validity. See, the Places of Worship Act of 1991 is one of the most crucial pieces of legislation that has been passed by the Parliament with the intention of upholding the principle of secularism and with the objective of curbing any communal tensions in the country over disputes involving any places of worship of any religious denomination. This act freezes the status and as well as the character of every place of worship in the country as on 15th August 1947. That is, any place of worship, be it a temple or a church or a mosque or a gurudwara, their status and character cannot be questioned or changed, and they will continue to remain the same as it was on the 15th of August 1947. It basically tries to prevent any attempt to convert any place of worship of any religious domination. This crucial piece of legislation was brought in the context of communal tensions that were going on in the country in the 1990s surrounding the Ram Janmabhoomi Babri Masjid dispute. As per the Act, no person or no institution shall attempt to convert any place of worship of any religious denomination into that of another denomination. It lays down the cutoff date as the 15th of August 1947, that is the day India became independent, and it also prohibits any legal proceedings from being instituted regarding the character of a place of worship, and it declares that all suits and appeals pending before any court or authority on the cutoff date regarding the conversion of the character of a place of worship shall come to an end. That is, all pending cases prior to this cutoff date will come to an end and there shall be no further legal proceedings. But however, this act provides for few exemptions as well. For example, the ancient and historical monuments and archaeological sites, as covered under the Archaeological Sites and Remains Act of 1958, they are exempted from the provisions of Place of Worship Act 1991. Then the law will also not apply for any religious site whose dispute has already been settled before the enactment of this legislation. Then finally, it created a special exemption for the ongoing Ram Janmabhoomi Babri Masjid dispute, as the legal proceedings had already begun, and this was done to allow the pending litigation to continue with the possible hope of arriving at a negotiated settlement. On this sensitive matter, recently the Supreme Court has passed a final ruling, and accordingly, the site where the Babri Masjid stood was awarded to the Hindu community for the construction of a Ram temple at Ayodhya, thereby bringing this controversial topic to an end. But however, it was in this very context that the Places of Worship Act of 1991 was enacted by the Parliament, because the challenge to the status and character of Babri Masjid and the claims over Ram Janmabhoomi were driven by communal politics in the name of correcting historical wrongs and historical injustices. But this attempt led to the illegal demolition of Babri Masjid, and it not only created a communal environment in the country, but it even led to widespread communal riots in the country. Hence, this stringent law was brought in to prevent the recurrence of any such conflicts and disputes, and it provides for stringent punishment to those who are found to be violating the law. It treats any such attempt as a criminal conspiracy and punishes those who have been convicted with 3 years of imprisonment along with a fine. But now, a petitioner has approached the Supreme Court challenging the constitutional validity of this law, and according to him, these provisions violate his fundamental right under Article 25 and 26, which guarantees the right to practice and propagate religion, and as well as the right to manage and administer places of worship. The petitioner has also challenged the law on the grounds that the state has an obligation under Article 49 to protect and to preserve religious and cultural heritage sites and national monuments. And under Article 51A, citizens also have a fundamental duty to protect monuments and cultural heritage sites. According to the petitioner, this law violates the principle of secularism because, according to him, it prevents one religious community from seeking justice against historical wrongdoings. According to the petitioners, it was the Muslim invaders in medieval India who destroyed several places of worship belonging to the Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Jains. And he claims that these historical wrongdoings will have to be corrected in order to provide a sense of justice to these communities. So, in the context of this controversial petition, the Supreme Court has sought a response from the central government, and we need to note that while passing the Ayodhya judgment, the Supreme Court had observed that this law is critical for preserving and upholding secularism in the country, because in a modern civilized society post-independence, it is futile to seek correction of any historical wrongdoings, because such attempts will only benefit the majoritarian communities, leading to the oppression and persecution of the minorities. So while passing the historic Ayodhya judgment, the Supreme Court had indirectly upheld the constitutional validity of this law, and it had hailed this legislation as crucial for preserving and protecting secularism in the country, because otherwise extremist elements and fringe elements of all religions could keep raising unnecessary challenges against the status and character of places of worship in order to further their political interests, leading to the rise of communal tensions in the country. So now it needs to be seen as to what would be the response of the government of India and as to how the Supreme Court would proceed on this sensitive matter. Now let's take up another important article from page number 13 that deals with helium reserves in India. See, helium is a colorless, odorless, tasteless, inert and noble gas, and it finds several crucial applications in both gaseous and liquefied forms in the industry. It is widely used in MRI scanners. It is also used in cryogenic engines of rockets as a coolant and as well as in nuclear reactors. Then it is also used in several other high-end technologies, including advanced welding, hard disk drives, solar industry, etc. So this is a critical and rare resource for any country, and India consumes around 70 million cubic meters of liquefied helium every year. But unfortunately for India, it doesn't have any large scale commercial exploitation of helium going on in the country, and hence it entirely imports its helium requirement from the United States, amounting to a massive 55,000 crore rupees every year. See, ever since Dutch physicist Kamerlingh Onnes managed to liquefy gaseous helium, scientists and physicists realized that the best place to look for helium reserves was underground, because Kamerlingh Onnes had collected helium gas from a hot spring area in Germany. So since then, scientists and physicists they started exploring helium reserves in volcanoes, in oil drills, and as well as in several other underground facilities. Now, this is where the United States hit a jackpot because as a result of this exploration, the world's largest helium reserves were discovered and they were located under the American Great Plains. So, this made the United States the biggest reserve holder of helium, thus making it the largest exporter of this critical resource. After exporting billions of dollars of worth helium to countries around the world, the United States has decided to preserve this critical resource for itself. And from the end of 2021, it is planning to cut off helium exports to other countries. So, this policy decision of the United States places India at a serious disadvantage because helium happens to be a critical resource for several high end technology industries. Another possible resource for helium imports could be Qatar, but it might be a very unreliable supplier to India considering the volatility in West Asian geopolitics. We already know how India's oil imports from West Asia is affected due to volatility and turbulence in West Asian geopolitics, and hence we wouldn't want to repeat the same with regard to helium imports as well. This is where the writer explores India's own helium reserves, which have remained untapped and largely unexplored. And according to several scientific studies, India does have considerable helium reserves under the Rajmahal volcanic basin located under Jharkhand. The story behind the discovery of these reserves dates back to the 1950s and involves the then leading physicist of India, Professor Satyendranath Bose. At a village known as Bakreshwar, located near Shantiniketan, an unnatural phenomenon was noticed, wherein in a small tank, water was boiling on its own naturally, and Satyendranath Bose was invited to investigate this phenomena. He, along with a student, eventually discovered that the naturally boiling water was emitting natural gas and it also contained 1.8% helium. Now, this was a stunning discovery for India because until then it was believed that India did not have any helium reserves. But despite this initial breakthrough, no further progress was achieved because large scale commercial exploitation of helium was not considered to be a worthy scientific endeavor. Few institutions, such as the Bombay Atomic Research Centre and the Variable Energy Cyclotron Centre of Kolkata, and even the then Atomic Energy Commission, did make some attempts. But these exploration efforts of the 1970s and 1980s did not yield much results, and it did not result in the large scale commercial exploitation of helium from the Rajmahal volcanic basin. But fortunately, post 2009, the Department of Atomic Energy has revived this helium exploration project and it has started prioritizing the scientific exploration of India's helium reserves, reportedly located under the Rajmahal volcanic basin. According to the writer, India has sufficient reserves to last for several years without any imports. And even though it may not be sufficient to help India emerge as a leading exporter, it is at least sufficient to meet India's domestic requirements. So, this pursuit of critical resource will help India to save precious import bills and as well as help the country to become self reliant with regard to such a critical resource. Now, let's take up another article from page number 13 that is related to a fossil based study on the evolution of Indian monsoons. See, we all know that around 180 million years ago, the Indian subcontinent broke away from the Gondwana supercontinent depicted in this image over here, and it began its northward journey, crossing the equator, then entering the northern hemisphere, then finally slamming into Eurasia, thus establishing its current position. So, from the Gondwana supercontinent, the Indian subcontinent was the only subcontinent which crossed from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere by moving across the equator. And obviously, this change in latitude also has a direct influence on its climatic conditions. Because the climatic conditions in the southern and the northern hemisphere are entirely different, and hence a team of researchers from Lucknow had taken up a study to understand how India's monsoon climate has evolved with the changing position of the Indian subcontinent. As a part of the study, the researchers relied upon fossil based evidence and they collected fossil leaves from the Deccan Volcanic Plateau, from the East Garo Hills of Meghalaya, from the Gura mine in Rajasthan, and as well as from a coal field in Assam. The study of these fossil leaves has led the researchers to conclude that India's monsoon climate around 25 million years ago resembled the current monsoon climate found in Australia. This study has shown that the fossil leaves that were taken from these places in India, they were adapted to an Australian type of monsoon and not to the current Indian monsoon system. These findings will further help the researchers to study and understand the biogeochemical changes that the Earth has undergone, particularly the Indian subcontinent. And this in turn will help us understand the changes that the flora and the fauna of the region have undergone. This will help us develop a better understanding of the biodiversity of the Indian subcontinent and as well as help in developing a more accurate climate model for the Indian subcontinent. Now, finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question: evaluate the tribal and ecological concerns surrounding Niti Aayog's development vision for Great Nicobar. The second question: discuss the emerging crisis of obtaining helium in India and its implications. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. This concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.